Welcome to Movement Notes podcast. And today I have my beautiful friend and the client of my studio, Pilates on George, Rhys. Welcome, Rhys.
Thank you, Alia.
And I hope this episode will give those of you who are still searching for certain answers, for certain diagnoses, for your pain, for your condition, that this episode will give you a boost to stop waiting and start acting. Whether you are a client or an instructor, it will inspire you to start moving and to take the driver's seat and stay in charge of your own health without waiting for definite answers. Rhys, I would like to start from very beginning before we even met. And to open this conversation, my first question would be, when did you stop waiting for one solution for your pain? What happened and what led you to this journey where you are today?
So maybe I should probably start with saying it's been a pretty substantial journey. And it's sort of spanned a couple of years. I was at home cooking dinner for my partner, and I could feel something just wasn't quite right. And it had coincided with the second part or the second jab from a vaccination around the COVID time, where the first jab was in two parts. The first time I had that vaccination, I felt like I had indigestion. And then 2 weeks later, the second time I had it, I got this sort of really cold sensation in my chest. And as the night went on, that started to morph into other feelings. And eventually I could feel the rippling in my cheeks, and I was nauseous. And I looked at my partner and I said, something's not right. We've got to go to hospital. That was the best decision that we made, because as I was walking across the park to go to A&E, um, that was the first stages of me getting ready to have a heart attack. And so by the time I got to Randwick A&E, I actually had that heart attack, thankfully, while I was being monitored. And then that night, the medical system went into overload, lockdown occurred. And by the time I got home, my partner and I were actually rehabilitating me, because everything that would have normally been in place had collapsed. You couldn't go in person and rehabilitate with professionals. I did eventually end up on an app, but it became really apparent quickly that my partner and I would have to do this for me. And so it started with a 2-minute walk. And then each day I was kind of able to increase that by another 1 or 2 minutes. And so my real focus in the beginning was trying to accept what had just happened and survive. And then in time, things got much better, and my focus started to be drawn to data in blood test results, because obviously my cardiologist and my GP were very focused on certain markers. And I think for me, as someone who really wants to perform and do it properly, that became huge for me. And I was constantly tracking this LDL cholesterol marker, and that had to be 1.9. And that became a total obsession for me. And it's really unfortunate, because I think that was probably the beginning of really unhealthy mental patterns in the way that I would think. But I started obsessing about food, about my body, about exercising, about eliminating joy out of my life kind of everywhere. And while it was great to see physical transformations post having a heart attack, like losing 11 kilos, it was really about building the blocks for the anxiety that was going to come. I had no idea that I was going to end up with debilitating anxiety, but I didn't have time to think about it at the beginning of the journey, because I was so focused on recovering and doing the right thing by myself. And if I'm really honest, the heart attack, all of that just feels like a bad dream now. I had to move on from that. What became the biggest battle of my life was actually this random event. To this day, there is still no diagnosis for what actually happened. there were a lot of things that were really challenging me in my life at the time. And I just remember sitting quite heavily into a sofa. And when I got up, I experienced a pain like I have never experienced in my life. It was entirely down the right hand side of my body. It felt like I was being electrocuted. And it lasted for about 45 seconds. And oh my goodness, like to this day, I've never felt anything like that. I was immediately in shock. I was freezing. I went to bed shivering. And, from that moment onwards, nothing has ever been the same since. And what started as this tiny little feeling of like a vibration like this under my right foot started to manifest into this full blown, intense buzzing vibration and spinal tapping. And the further that went along, the more pronounced that became until it would get to the point where I'd, be falling asleep out of total exhaustion. And it would take me 5 or 6 hours to get to sleep. Unfortunately, it was postural as well. So it meant that it kicked in when I wanted to sit down or go to bed, which is not great at the end of the day because it's what we want to do. And I guess, for a really long period of time, that was sort of allowed to flourish. I had a GP that was really slow to diagnose anything, to do any tests, and I guess it was just like a thousand flowers blooming. And eventually I had to make the decision to move on. And full disclosure, I think, if anyone's listening there and they have this undiagnosed pain, don't ever think that you can't move on from people in the medical profession. I went through 3 GPs, 2 neurologists, 4 psychologists, and eventually I found my people. And once I got to that point, I was finally able to deal with all of the trauma from a heart attack. I was able to deal with this debilitating anxiety and start to really focus on this shift from the medical profession into what can I physically do for my body? Well, I can physically make my body strong going to Pilates. I can treat my body with respect by eating the right food. I gave up alcohol,
And
and it,
motivated me to do that.
yes, that's right. And that all started with just this random conversation one day. And the next thing, we're both spurring each other on. And it's really nice that you've mentioned that because, yourself and also 1 or 2 of the other instructors that I've worked with, they play a massive role in my mental health and in the strength that I can now see in my body and my own understanding of my body, which
Yeah.
I just had none of before any of this. I mean, I didn't even know I was having a heart attack. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Can you take me maybe into that night of heart attack again?
Yeah.
For our listeners, remind what time was that? Like the world was struggling, right? Everybody
My
was
God.
in the medical
Yeah.
like the worst time to have any health issues because you are the last in line, right?
Yeah.
To
Absolutely.
looked after.
Absolutely.
If you can go back to that night, what happened in the hospital? And then talk to me more about anxiety. How long did you have it for? What triggered to get out of that
Yeah.
spiral?
Yeah. So, I mean, I, I think things really started to escalate. It was in the evening, so it would have been around about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and it became very apparent that I needed to move from the eye hospital across to Ranwick because they were really worried about what my heart was doing. They were worried about this pain in my cheeks, and yeah, I arrived at A&E. It was so strange. I remember, they put whatever it is that you call that goes into your arm, and she started pushing the drip or the needle, and I just felt this crushing pain in my chest, and that was me actually having that minor heart attack. Thank God it was minor. Thank goodness it happened in that environment. In terms of what was going through my mind, and, sometimes I still think about this and get really upset, is that I looked at my partner and I actually said to him, "Am I going to die?" And I remember these little tears coming down my face. And he looked at me and he said, "No, you're not." And then all my mind could think was, my God, if I die, I've made absolutely no preparations to look after him. I don't have a will. And then that was all swept away because I was then moved to a different environment. And, that night, lockdown happened. And within 72 hours, I was sent home. So it was pretty full on. And I don't want that to sort of be depressing or down because what it really taught me is how resilient I am. And I feel like that's such an overused word, or it can be really trendy, but I had no idea how strong I was until I went through that initial recovery period, which is 6 to 9 months post having a heart attack. And I'm very fortunate because I didn't end up with a lot of damage to the tissue. But, in terms of what came after, specifically as it related to the anxiety, that was the biggest battle for sure. That was at least 16 months. And it made me so small. I don't feel like I had the right mix of people around me because the initial advice was, particularly with all of these tremors and vibrations and pain, was to stop going to the gym, stop walking at a significant pace. You need to be really careful. You've got a crushed spine, get this CT scan. And all of a sudden, I was just in this world of things that beeped, people telling me to stay still. It's very different to, what I'd been used to. I mean, I've had various personal trainers who had become my best friends for 32 years of my life. And I think that's the really sad thing about anxiety and pain is that it makes you feel so small and you don't realize how small your world's becoming really quickly because I stopped leaving home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think if you had an exact diagnosis from that night when you had a shooting pain down your right cheek,
Mm.
if you went to a doctor and the doctor said, this is happening because of this,
Yeah.
do you think that would prevent you getting into that anxiety spiral again and again and being so worried? Or do you think it would not change anything? I know it's a hypothetical conversation.
I
What if?
yeah, I think and it's a really interesting question because I spent so much time with a psychologist undoing that thought process because we can't change the past. And I was really focused on the past. But to answer your question, I think if I had have got a diagnosis and things had have been explored in that moment, it would have given an accurate picture of what was happening at that time. It may not have changed that I experienced vibration, tremors, spinal tapping, radiating burn, but it might have led to series of events might have led to something concrete and clear. And at least then I would have known. But it was the not knowing
Yeah.
that really triggered horrendous anxiety. And by really bad anxiety, I mean to the point where I would be walking in a supermarket and feeling like I was actually walking on a trampoline or in an art gallery. I would walk to my partner's place and fall over in the street because I'd be losing my balance. I could sit in a restaurant and I would just get this surging pain up my spine. My face would go as red as a tomato. I knew that if I took a blood pressure reading in that moment, my blood pressure would have been off the charts. And it wasn't uncommon at the peak of those periods for it to hit 220 over 116. And these are all terrifying things when you're locked in your own mind. And
Because
I never want to go back to that. I
I'm
never
sure
want to go back to that.
I think
Yeah.
for us as movement professionals, like from my perspective, you're a very tricky client to work with
Mm,
because when you come to a session, I can see, I can see a strong young man. But then when I talk to you in the initial consultation, what's going on? There's so many things that there is no particular diagnosis. So my first thought is, what do I need to do in order not to harm? That
mm,
would be my first kind of thought. And then I will think, okay, well, how do we make you better actually? Because as
yeah.
a movement professional, we also want to know the answers. Why do you experience what you experience? And
Yeah.
it's a really tricky situation not to have those answers because then I take responsibility. And then
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
in our case, it was a very, what we call in my professional language, a therapeutic alliance between me and you, right? The relationship between
Yeah.
me and you that based on trust. So maybe you can talk about how often did you have those vibrations and the pain, and you started doing Pilates kind of as you were experiencing it.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say it wasn't until much later in the day that I realized how terrifying I might have been as a client and just how much responsibility from your perspective of having me in your studio, in your care. It's tricky, but I could never see that at the beginning because truthfully, I was so caught up in myself and trying to be together and calm and collected. And so I guess, when I initially started, I don't think I could do more than 3 or 4 clams. I think I was so tired, And we laugh about that, but it was like, I remember thinking, oh my God, like, I thought I was strong. Do I even have muscles? Like, what's holding me together? This is the response. But also, it's really important to feel little like that. And I guess in time, me just showing up consistently was probably the best thing ever. Consistency meant I became familiar with the path walking to the studio. Knowing that nothing was going to happen to me on that path meant that I was in a better frame of mind by the time I got to the studio. I was building trust. I could see that my body was doing things that weren't hurting, and we were identifying things that we were doing that would hurt me. And for the most part, it started introducing other things into my life that wasn't strictly pain related or anxiety related. And that was when the realization came to me is that I don't think there's enough conversation around medicine being what we actually do for ourselves, as opposed to what we just take, or the professionals that we put around ourselves that are just trying to diagnose us or to fix something. We have to actually try and fix ourselves as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I remember that first conversation that we had in the studio, and we've been working for
yeah.
a year and a half together. So back then, when we just started, and I remember you having the pain, and I remember exactly when I said, "Look, we can't really get rid of
Yeah.
it, perhaps, but we will do our best to do everything we can so this pain comes back not every week but every 3 weeks, and then
Yeah.
6 weeks, and then every 8 weeks, and maybe every 6 months, and maybe once a year, so we get you stronger, more capable, and as a result what happens is you believe in yourself more, right? So it's a
Yeah.
physical journey, but it's also a mental journey, and I think we got there.
Oh my God, absolutely. The exponential change between where we started and where we're at today, let alone where we're going to be in the future, is huge. And I guess as we've gone through that process, I've learned to really get in tune with my body. It's reminded me of all the things I knew about my body when I used to be a gymnast in another life. And I know that we can push the limits, but with yourself and, particularly with another instructor that I work with in the studio, there's a huge amount of trust. We can look at each other and we understand when something's not quite right. My body will tell me, if you push this, I'm going to punish you. I, I just know. Or there's that certain movement that I have to be so careful of, which is this downward pressure on my tailbone. But that has not stopped us in any way. We've just learned to work around it. And I think, that was a huge realization for me that was so positive is that just because you can't do one thing one way doesn't mean you can't do it 11 different ways. I mean, the world's full of brilliant people that have dedicated their lives to practices. So there's always a workaround. And we just work around it, which is
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Having that flexible mind and attitude, let's just give it a go. Maybe not perfect. Let's just try.
Yeah.
And I always think about how we learn short spine, for example,
Yes.
when you lift your hips up. And I remember how much, hesitation it was. And it's as from an instructor perspective. it's very tricky to find out when the client is scared because they don't know what's ahead or if they're scared because it hurts. So I
Yeah.
guess with trust, I learned how to read that in use. We can push a little bit to the right limit. And I'm not saying we did make mistakes along the way, right?
Yeah, of course we did. Of
Yeah,
course we
we
did.
did
Yeah.
plenty of mistakes. It wasn't all perfect, picture like journey. But the short spine, for example, is an exercise that comes to my mind always because it's such a beautiful spinal flexion on the reformer, for example, that we're doing in your case as you lift your hips up, coming up in a shoulder stand. And I remember how me as an educator, when I teach the students, this is the way to do it, right? The way you explain to break it down, and if the client is not ready, you do something instead. So in your case, I took that leap of faith and thought, okay, well, that movement will be really good. So let's do it kind of in such a small way that is so, so easy that
Mm.
eventually you can chat to me as you're doing it and not think
Yeah.
about how scary it is. And now you're doing it beautifully. And it's been like that with many other movements, not only short spine, but this is the one that comes to my mind. And I guess talking about the tailbone issue that we are cautious of and, all this rolling backs, if you can maybe explain more, what sensations do you have? What happens when the roll backs, which Pilates is really known for, the flexion and rolling back, engaging the abdominals and final articulation that we have to be very careful and modify now.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess if I use a roll down as an example, because this is how we really learnt about this sort of violent response that I get in my body. So I remember we were going to roll down. That was the first step. And I did that. And honestly, it felt like, if you can imagine like the spiky ball, except with real like sharp points, it felt like I was rolling back onto that ball with hundreds of pins going into my tailbone and my nervous system. It was just like being lit up by like a Christmas tree, and like tingling all over my body, and then this burning sharp pain. And I remember being really shocked in that moment. And then it took initially like several weeks for that to fully dissipate. And I'd come home, I wouldn't be able to sit. It'd be painful in bed. And then, and then it would start to die down again. But it never stopped us. And I love that. So then maybe the next time it was like we would try and like roll up into a sit up. And then I'd hit a certain point and the same thing would happen. The really key point about this is A, we didn't stop trying, and B, I survived. You know, I totally survived.
When this sensation comes like that, like I don't want to do it again. Like I don't want to
Yeah,
go.
of course. Yeah. Of
So
course. And look, we still have those moments. You'll ask me to do something and I'll be like, "Nah." And and I'm open to everything. I really am, but I'm less open to that because I really know that it doesn't work for my tailbone. And I'm just trusting that because I want to keep moving. I want to keep coming in consistently the amount of times that I'm coming to the studio. And I know that if I hurt myself, I lose out in that situation because it means that I can't come for a week or I've got to cancel for a week and a half. And it's not that I can't get on with my life. I can. It's unpleasant, but I would rather be in my 3 days a week than, really hurt myself. Yeah.
and I think you can continue now. If you
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
if you trigger something, you can
Yeah.
still continue. You don't have to take 2-week breaks like you had before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And doesn't and I'm really glad you mentioned that because it doesn't stop me at all now because we know all of the workarounds. And if anything, it actually helps me to keep moving.
Yeah.
Uh, it really does. Because when I stop, things start to settle in. And we laugh about this. I feel like at 50, like the wheels didn't break and fall off my cart, but everything started squeaking. So, like, when I'm not moving, it's really funny. It's like as if arthritis that I never knew I had starts to present. And when I keep moving, it all goes away. So we laugh about it. We say, no, no, we're going to be, this is it now. We're going to be moving for the rest of our life. Yeah.
Exactly. So now, Rhys, when you during such long journey, at this day, do you have a definite diagnosis? What's going on? Where these vibrations are coming from? What are the contraindications and things?
Mm.
Did you find an answer?
So I feel like there's two parts to that. I feel like I'm closer. It's not a definitive answer. And I know that when I reapproach this conversation with two of my professionals who I trust implicitly now, I have to be careful about how I do that because I don't want to dishonor the journey to date. And I'm thinking clearly now because I've also moved through and beyond anxiety. So where I'm currently sitting at with it is I definitely have varying stages of arthritis in my lower spine from advanced to minor, but everybody has that, particularly at my age. It's suspected that I do have peripheral nerve
Mm.
damage, which has triggered neuropathy. And there's potentially kind of like, I think it's called, I have to look, cramp fasciculation syndrome. And this might explain like this little muscle that's constantly firing and tapping. I've learned to live with all of those things. And the nicest thing that I can probably say about that right now is that, you know, when it's really bad, I still wake up alive every morning. And it's much easier for me to cope with that. Will we find out if there's something more? I don't know. Maybe I feel like I've not quite given up on that journey, but I also can't fascinate on about it to the level that I was because it's just completely counterproductive to my life. I think it can make you really small and life's precious. You know, I'm so grateful. Oh yeah, there could be so many other things that could really debilitate me in my life that I consider myself now at this stage of the journey that I'm truly blessed. I know on my Instagram I've got a highlights section that I titled gratitude and it has my Pilates journey. And if I think about when I was so anxious and I couldn't do those three clams, and now when we occasionally film things, even when I don't know you're filming sometimes, I put those movements there because I have to remind myself that I've come a long way
Yeah.
thanks to you, you know, and also thanks to my consistency. Like I'm really good about coming in and I love it. But, you know, chalk and cheese. Yeah.
It's a very common thing to have in a studio, to have a client who has the pain but doesn't have a diagnosis.
Yeah.
It's more common than we like to admit. And I think that's exactly why the studio is set up like mine, where it's a full studio, fully equipped studio. We are known for rehabilitation, and very often we don't go past that, right? So you always stay as a rehabilitative client because your pain comes back in cycles, right? So it comes
Mhm.
goes, comes
Yeah.
and goes. It's really challenging to progress to where you are now, for example. And well, my question is that what would you say to people who are in maybe in the beginning of the journey like that, or
Yeah.
maybe they've been in this journey for many years? It's chronic pain, comes and goes, nobody knows. The doctor said strengthen your core, or maybe there's arthritis, maybe there is this, there is that. There's no specific, here's the pill, take it, here's the movement, do it, and this movement, don't do it. So there is no specific answers. What would you say to clients, to people like that?
I would definitely say be patient, be open, and be kind to yourself. And I feel like I can say that with a lot of thought around that because it's very easy to get caught up and to not trust people that have, in some cases, trained, you know, for a substantial part of their life to really be an expert in a field. So you have to be able to trust them, whether that's a Pilates instructor or a professional. But you also need to know the line. You need to take responsibility for your own body. You need to learn to communicate what's right and wrong. And I think you need to find and hang on to something that's really inspiring in a positive way. So for me, like, I think if you're really in the thick of it, try and find something along the lines of what I helped. So there's this beautiful poet called Rainer Maria Rilke, and this quote just came up, and I don't want to get it wrong, so please forgive me for reading it. But it said, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." And that was just like unbelievably powerful for me because as a human, it allowed me to feel everything, you know, the beauty of life and the absolute terror. It just melted away anything that I might have felt from an anxiety perspective. I need to feel that. I needed to know that because without that anxiety, without the terror, I have no barometer for what's going to be a beautiful, good day and a beautiful life that I have with great people in it. And this idea of, it's exactly the essence of what you spoke about, that my pain is cyclical. Sometimes psychologically things are cyclical. We could see it. I'd be on fire, like I could see it in my body, the movements we were doing. And then I would hit that cycle again and almost revert back to 10 out of 100. That's fine. That feeling's not final. And I think when you really accept that and you invite all the terror in and all of these things, then you're just living.
Yeah. Very beautiful
Yeah.
quote. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a fan. Yeah. That was and I think, try to find, because there are people that are in a lot of pain. And I think you have to find something along those lines that are going to help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My final question for our conversation will be, what is your goal now? Whether it comes to a Pilates practice or just
Yeah.
a life goal. Share.
I think like from a Pilates practice perspective, we often joke about this movement called the swan.
The swan, and I just want to
Yeah.
specify, it's the swan on a Cadillac. It's from Advanced Repertoire. It's a somersault up onto the rails of the Cadillac across them and do a swan, and then so you pull up somersault and then go all the way down. It's very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, there's a part of me, there's that small competitive side of me that really wants to do that. And I think while the need to want to do that has maybe fallen back a little bit because we're starting to go in all these different directions on different apparatus, I'm still keeping that out there. Maybe something that is less physically demanding is my Pilates goal is that I just want to really be as nimble, as flexible as I possibly can for my age and going forward. I want to be the best version of myself that I can be for my age. And that's where I think Pilates is just so crucial for me because every session I potentially learn something that my body can do that I never knew it could. I see that I progressionally get better and better at something through repetition and guidance. And I know that there's still so much more for me to do, which keeps me hungry. It's the best way to be.
So much more. That's why
Yeah.
it's so wonderful. That excitement and novelty, if you're looking for it, it's endless, right? They
Yeah.
offer you endless variations of things that you can do well, but also things that can challenge you. Just in,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I just wish I know I've said it before, but I feel like this Australian macho thing that maybe I bought into in my 20s and 30s where you have to be He-Man, and it's about pumping iron, like getting this, and that's fine. And I'm not knocking the guys that do that. It's like respect. But I think at 48 to 49, I was like, I don't want to be He-Man. Like I want to be flexible and strong and have good posture and all of those sort of things. And yeah, I just wish I had started 20 years ago.
yeah,
Yeah,
never too late.
exactly. And we're proving that.
As they say, a good time to start was yesterday. Another good time
Yeah,
today. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Rhys. It was such a wonderful conversation.
Pleasure.
I'm very grateful for you as a client in the studio. It's always lovely, and as a friend, You're my confidant.
Yeah. Likewise, likewise. I love our time together, and thank you because you've really just pushed me so far, and I've loved the journey. I've loved it. Yeah.
Same.
So thanks.
Thank you so much. All right, guys, that's all. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And if there are any questions to me or Rhys, please pop them in the comments and we'll answer them. All right. See ya.